Good morning and welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the final rulemaking workshop for House Bill 1543. Today, we have a comprehensive review of the proposed rules on alternative compliance pathway, exemptions, and extensions. I'm Annalyn Bergen, the Clean Buildings Compliance Lead and part of the rulemaking staff. Other presenters today include Johnny, Dylan, and Luke. This slide represents our agency's purpose. If you're unfamiliar with Commerce, we offer a broad range of programs and services. Commerce touches every aspect of community and economic development. Commerce has over 400 grants and programs. We work with local governments, tribes, businesses, and local civic leaders throughout the state to strengthen communities so that all residents may thrive and prosper. Here's today's agenda, similar to before. If you've been with us before, you'll notice that, again, as I mentioned, you'll have the beginning slides. A lot of this information is repeated for newcomers. Same as before, I'll give an introduction of the rulemaking process and the flow and timeline. We'll go over our intentions and scope of rulemaking. I'll provide a summary of comments that we received since our last rulemaking workshop. Luke, Dylan, and Donnie will go over the proposed rules. When we present the information, we'll pause for questions and comments. Jeff will give an opportunity for you to speak if you raise your virtual hand. We hope after today, you always feel informed enough to make a comment and to stay engaged and be part of the process. Just real quick, this is the rulemaking staff. This is not all of our staff, but just know that our entire team is dedicated to providing timely, actionable, and clear information about the Clean Buildings Performance Standard and kind of help you guide you through the rulemaking process. So the Clean Buildings Law is referenced in RCW 19.27a.210 to RCW 1927a.260. That is the legislation. So when House Bill 1543 was passed, it officially amended those RCWs. The Clean Buildings Performance Standard includes ASHRAE Standard 100 with Washington State Amendments, WAC 19450. So that's what these rules will amend is WAC 19450. So just think of the RCW as to what it explains what the law must say. It explains what the law say must and must not happen. The WAC is kind of the how. So we're developing the how of the Clean Buildings Law. You know, the rulemaking process is written in the Administrative Procedures Act. It begins with, the process begins with us filing the CR 101. A copy of that is found on our website. For this rulemaking cycle, we have hosted, this is our fourth workshop, and we've also drafted an environmental justice assessment, which I'll explain a little further in the next slide. After this series of workshop, we enter into the next phase, which after this we'll enter into that phase, which is the finalizing the draft rules. The team files the draft rules with the CR 102 form, which can also include a small business economic impact statement. Filing the CR 102 starts the formal public comment period, which usually lasts about 30 days, and it concludes with a public hearing. Commerce holds a public hearing after the CR 102 is filed to get that feedback, to hear more concerns and suggestions, and to learn about any unintended consequences. After reviewing all the comments and making much needed changes, the agency adopts the final version of the rule. This is filed in our CR 103. So the rules are adopted after filing the rules are adopted 30 days after filing the CR 103. And when I go over the timeline, you'll see when that could happen. So once adopted, the rules become part of the Washington Administrative Code, which is WAC 19450. So in 2021, the Healthy for All, known as the HEAL Act, passed to promote the reduction of environmental and health disparities in Washington state in order to improve the health of all Washington state residents. Required by the HEAL Act statute, the environmental justice assessments are an assessment for agencies to determine potential impacts of agency activities on overburdened communities, vulnerable populations, and tribes and tribes from all categories, from all categorized significant agency action. So since this rulemaking is considered a significant agency action, and the EJA is required, so that environmental justice assessment is required to involve people and communities most impacted by environmental health in decision-making about the rulemaking. So Commerce completed that draft, and it's available on the OFM dashboard and our website. We'll email it again to registrants. You have the opportunity to comment on it, and Commerce will integrate any of the input and findings from the community and post a final EJA on the OFM dashboard and our website. So many people are confused on when the deadline for comments are. Workshops are not part of the formal rulemaking. It's what we use, Commerce use to engage with you, to receive your feedback, and to kind of present our proposed rules. We receive comments after workshops to incorporate them for the next workshop. So we ask you to send them in 2 weeks, usually 2 weeks after, just so we can have enough time to start incorporating into the rules. Because we do these workshops in increments and sections and by topic, right? Then we have what's called the formal comment period. This is after that CR 102 is filed. When the CR 102 is available to you, you'll see all of the proposed rules, not just sections that like we've been presenting. And that's your opportunity to, when you comment on that, it will be part of the formal comment period. So there are many different deadlines, but for the most part, it's for us to have the opportunity to incorporate these incrementally, right? Ultimately, you can submit comments up to the public hearing. So this slide kind of depicts the cycle of public comments during the workshop phase. After every workshop, draft rules will be emailed to the registrant, later posted to the website as soon as possible. We give you a couple weeks to comment, and then we don't have a workshop after this, but you'll certainly have access to all comments received. We'll develop a dashboard so you can see all of them. We ask participants in the workshop to just be respectful, use the Q&A field, use the comment form to submit feedback. Our goal is for the rules to be reflective of our work together, and our rules will only benefit from these workshops being inclusive and participatory. So we just ask everyone to be respectful and have good manners. We encourage everyone, especially those impacted building owners and those who work closely with them, work closely with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard to share their input to shape the final rulemaking or final rules. Remember, your comments of support is just as needed to move certain rules forward. So this slide displays the timeline for House Bill 1543. These dates are subject to change. This is our fourth workshop. You'll see that with the arrow. Some dates have shifted because we added another workshop because we deemed it necessary for us to present more information to you. So each CR filing, it comes with a lot of work, a lot of coordination and approval from our leadership. The rules, I just want to mention that the rules will be codified 30 days after the CR 103 filing. Right now, we hope to, so here's the shifted dates. We will continue to communicate when filings happen and when pertinent events occur in our bulletin, in our websites, and if you registered, we will email you as well. So eventually we will publish and release a new version of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard integrated document, free of charge, of course, as usual. And we aim for the beginning of the year. So House Bill 1543 was a result of the Clean Buildings Work Group legislative report. This included recommended changes to meet compliance standard. The bill contained 3 components: the authority to create and adopt alternative compliance pathways, providing greater flexibility, the ability to grant timelines and extensions to building owners working towards compliance, and the addition of exemption categories to the standard. Many of you have voiced concern about the upcoming deadline, which is in 2026, applying for extensions and other exemptions. and perhaps an alternative compliance pathway. As you know, we try to stay engaged with you. We hear you. The timeline from the previous slide shows us trying to codify this as soon as possible, really, so that you can have the opportunity to apply for those extensions, exemptions, or alternative compliance pathway. So please understand that you can't apply for this until these rules are finalized. How you can help continue to participate until, we've kind of codified everything. And then the scope of our rulemaking is, we're trying to develop the rules around documentation and timeline for these extension exemptions and compliance pathways. So please note that some alternative metrics will not be explored this time around because some may not be feasible because they just require a more study and may not fit into this timeline. We'll explore them in the future. We have secured funding for an EYT study and implementing an analysis to better align with our standards with other jurisdictions, hopefully in a couple of years. We want to make more informed decisions in developing those metrics with better data. So we will be making other necessary rule changes for consistency and alignment. You saw that in the last workshop. We will not be updating our energy use intensity targets, any of the building use types, shift normalization factors. We will not be creating rules for the incentive programs. And finally, we are not considering updating to the new version of ASHRAE Standard 100 2024 version. Okay. We receive 13 comments. Many address different topics and are substantial. Like these comments came with letters of, and I've tried to summarize them as best as I can. Although I may not cover all of them in detail today, please know we read all of your comments and we take them into consideration as we write and draft these rules. Just note that some of these comments actually we received within the last 24 hours and we met before the comments were submitted. So we were unable to incorporate them or consider them, but we will after this workshop. We'll send you a link to that dashboard so you could review comments received. You'll notice that some of the comments have asterisk. This indicates that we've received multiple comments similar to this. On extensions and exemptions, there's been general support on them. Many commenters request greater clarity in the language on what qualifies building for financial hardship. Another commented for all approved exemptions and extension, the commenter suggests still requiring the completion of benchmarking, E&P, and O&M. Another one asked for clarification regarding the exemption pathway for historic buildings, requesting that we provide more definitive interpretation of historic integrity. And then on alternative compliance pathway, again, you see that asterisk. Many have recommended lowering the requirement that the new heat pump covers. Many recommended lowering the requirement that the new heat pump covers 90% of the building's peak design load. Others have suggested to consider a revision to require only space conditioning systems, but not hot water electrification. And then suggest to refer to BEPS to electrify one or the other as a two-step pathway when developing tier 2 targets. And then more on the alternative compliance pathways, we receive a request that the proposed 15% weather normalized EUI reduction threshold be lowered to 5% for tier 1 building owners, or that the rule provide a separate lower reduction pathway for hard to abate buildings with a 5% target. For the electrification pathway, one commenter suggested to increase the allowable fossil fuel or electric resistance supplemental emergency allowance from 10% to 20% of the building's space heating load to ensure adequate resiliency and redundancy for a critical process. And again, for the electrification pathway, we were suggested with 4 options: a phase, a percent target, multi-cycle approval plan, hard to abate alternative, and a conditional compliance pathway, or conditional compliance for the electrification pathway. In the general comments, many support eliminating the requirements for the O&M program to be implemented a year prior to compliance date. We've received requests needing clarity on failed bonds or levies, on whether they have to be energy related. Many have asked for better alignment with the Seattle BEPS. We received proposed changes to 4.3.4, the minimum energy use reduction, and the deletion of the baseline definition. A commenter said that building owners need more clarity of the measurement of implementation and how their compliance will be considered complete. And then there was suggestion to delete or not adopt sections 6.5, tenant improvements. And there have been comments on concerns over assisted living and skilled nursing facilities, concerns over costs for assisted living and skilled nursing facilities, for us to develop a set targeted, the person who submitted the comments developed a set of targeted recommendations. They submitted a set of targeted recommendations, which provided with addressed concerns, taking into consideration, assisted living and skilled nursing facilities, building design and operations. They raised concern on how the Clean Buildings Performance Standard conflicts with resident rights, provide unrealistic timelines, and administrative burden. We had another comment that suggests to exclude older multifamily buildings less than 50,000, or these building owners lack staff capacity, and compliance would be a significant burden, and penalties imposed would be detrimental to remaining in business. So I am going to pass it over. It was a lot of talking for me. I'm sorry if I went over them too quickly. I'm going to pass it over to Donnie to go over some of the proposed rules.
Thanks, Annalyn. Everybody, Donnie Westfall, part of the technical team with the Clean Buildings team. So today is our comprehensive review where we're going to look at all of the proposed changes that we've made through the rulemaking process. We'll go over the more substantive changes via PowerPoint here in the next few slides. I'll start out by covering the proposed alternative compliance pathways as outlined in section 4 of the standard. And then I'll pass it over to Dylan, who will go over proposed extensions and exemption language updates from Annex Z and Annex Y. And then Luke will provide a comprehensive look at the entire integrated document updates. So covering all the proposed language and highlighting other clarifying edits we've made, as well as going over the informative Annex B. Next slide. So first, our proposed alternative compliance pathways that we've covered these in the last couple workshops, but we have tweaked things slightly. So tier 1 buildings that do not comply by meeting the EUI target or elect to not comply through the investment criteria of the standard may choose to pursue compliance through either of the 2 proposed alternative compliance pathways. The first proposed alternative pathway is minimum EUI reduction. And the second proposed pathway is elective electrification, formerly known as prescriptive electrification. We've updated this name just to clarify that this is not a required pathway, but is indeed an alternative option. Next slide. Minimum energy use reduction. So tier 1 covered building owners can comply with this performance metric if they reduce their building's weather normalized EUI by 15% over a baseline measured weather normalized EUI. Since workshop 3, we have modified this language slightly based on feedback to better clarify the requirements for measuring the baseline EUI and to provide just more consistency in the general formatting between this new language and other sections within the integrated document. So 434, minimum energy use reduction. If a tier 1 covered building's measured WNUI is reduced a minimum of 15% from the baseline WNUI, the building complies. For first-time tier 1 covered building applicants, a baseline WNUI would be measured from 12 consecutive months of data monitored in a period not to exceed 5 years prior to the building's compliance date. For previously compliant buildings, so for the building's subsequent compliance cycles, the measured WNUI on Form A from that building's most recent approved compliance application will be the baseline WNUI. 4341, a qualified energy auditor shall conduct an energy audit in accordance with Section 8. This doesn't have to be a level 2 energy audit, so long as the audit can identify efficiency measures that will achieve the 15% WNUI reduction. And then EEMs, or energy efficiency measures, that will be implemented or shall be implemented in accordance with Section 9 of the standard. 4342, building owners shall benchmark their building's energy use in accordance with Section 5.2. Otherwise, in the case where there is no measurable EUI, they'll need to pursue compliance with either the investment criteria, Section 433, or the elective electrification pathway, 435. 4343, Tier 1 buildings with energy targets must still develop their energy use intensity target in accordance with Section 7.2. So for Tier 1 buildings unable to develop those targets, Form C will utilize what's called a national median site EUI, as calculated by Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And just a final note within the policy, that compliance with this section will expire in the 2046-2048 compliance cycles. So as discussed in previous workshops, our thinking here is that the buildings will need to ultimately comply with final metrics that align with the state energy strategy by that 2050-2053 compliance cycle. Slide, thank you. The next alternative pathway is elective electrification. So 435, Tier 1 covered buildings shall replace existing fossil fuel consuming space conditioning equipment with electric heat pump equipment. Space heating heat pumps shall at a minimum be designed to meet 90% of the building's peak design load. Fossil fuel or electric resistant space heating sources may accommodate for emergency and supplemental space heating for a maximum of 10% of the building's space heating load. As Alan covered earlier, we received a few comments suggesting edits to the scale of the heating system electrification and for the heat pump sizing requirements. We do appreciate this feedback as we work through our policy development. And while we considered these suggestions, we felt that the 90% threshold is important to the overall EUI reduction efforts and in aligning with buildings and aligning buildings in the Seattle area with the decarbonization efforts outlined in Seattle's BEPS law. I just want to reiterate that this and the minimum EUI reduction are both elective pathways that may not be feasible for all building owners, in which case there are still alternative or other pathways available to achieve compliance with the standard. 4351, Tier 1 buildings that implement electrification are not required to perform an energy audit. So if they are pursuing compliance via this pathway, you don't need to have an energy audit done on the building to electrify the heating system. That said, you will likely need to be able to show the design load of the existing system and the proposed alternative and provide some of that documentation as outlined in the reporting requirements that Luke will touch on later. 4352, Tier 1 covered buildings shall provide energy use data as specified by Section 5.2, Building Energy Monitoring. The exception to that one is buildings that are unable to benchmark energy use data at the building level. They can still utilize this compliance pathway to comply with the standard. 4353, Tier 1 covered buildings with energy targets must meet all the criteria for developing the EUIT in accordance with Section 7.2. For Tier 1 covered buildings unable to develop the EUIT in accordance with that section, Form C will utilize that national median site EUI metric as calculated by Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And just a final note in this policy section, elective electrification is valid for only one compliance cycle. Pause here for questions before we pass it over to Dylan, if there's anything. Doesn't sound like.
Yeah, no new questions.
Okay.
Thanks for pausing.
Perfect.
I'm like,
yeah,
oh,
it
it's
is all
silent.
review.
Okay.
no substantive changes to some of the language you've already proposed in the last workshop. So just kind of covering it up again. All right, over to Dylan.
Thank you, Donnie. Similarly, tier extensions have not been changed substantially since the workshop 1 where they were first discussed. However, there were some changes made since then, and I'll kind of go over those as well as just generally covering extension language and what that means. So extensions, covered buildings are eligible for a 2-year compliance date extension if they submit an extension application no sooner than 6 months prior to or up to 6 months after the compliance date. And this extension under our proposed language is for situations such as beyond control, change of ownership, financial restrictions, new construction, or compliance light. And all of these were part of the initial workshop 1. A couple changes that were made were from the initial workshop, beyond control did not have the EEM implementation as part of that. Initially, that was a separate section, but we determined that that's really falling under the beyond control. So say, for example, you have an energy efficiency measure that has been implemented, but it was implemented less than 12 months prior to the compliance date, and you don't have energy monitoring for that. This would be an extension because it is beyond your control to get that 12 months of data. There were a couple small changes that I'll let Luke go into in the language for change of ownership. And the other significant changes since workshop 1 were the removal of extensions for instances such as change of building activity type or a change of compliance pathway. Next slide, please. The new language here also includes compliance light, which allows extensions for buildings that have taken actions but may not be meeting compliance targets or alternatives. Notably, in order to qualify for compliance light, building owners will need to have completed benchmarking, determined their energy use intensity target, and completed the EMP and O&M program, as well as implementing. This can be demonstrated, and the extension is for either meeting that target or showing an alternate compliance via an alternative compliance pathway. Also of note, with the new construction, we did modify language just slightly to in response to comments, allowing for some changes with specifically if there is additions, remodels, or demolitions which modify at least 25% of the square footage. Notably, and I'll let Luke go into this further on, these extensions are valid for 2 years beyond the covered building's compliance date. And for tier 1 buildings, they may qualify for an extension renewal, but they would need to apply for that. And as you can see, following your extension timeline, you have the ability to either submit for a renewal, an exemption, or demonstrate compliance with the standard. Jumping to the next slide, please.
Dylan, you forgot one thing. We changed how we spelled light.
Oh my gosh, yes. We changed compliance light from LITE to LIGHT.
Yes.
Thank you, Annalyn.
Thanks. We were considering low calorie compliance, but I don't think that would have worked out. So LIGHT it is. Thanks, Dylan.
Great. Tier 2 extensions, much of this language is similar, so I'm not going to go into too much. The only differences from the slides previous are there is not language for delays in energy efficiency measure implementation. That is because tier 2 buildings are not required to implement energy efficiency measures. And the one other Similarly, with the tier 1, there is the removal of extensions for changes of compliance pathway or building activity type. Next slide, please. One small difference here in this compliance light is for tier 2 buildings, they can qualify for compliance light as long as they have completed benchmarking and determined their energy use intensity target. This extension allows for more time for building owners to comply by creating and submitting the energy management plan and operations and maintenance program. That said, they still do not need to meet a energy use intensity target. Similarly, following their 2-year extension beyond the building's compliance date, the building owner must submit an application for either exemption or demonstrating compliance. There is not an ability for tier 2 to submit an extension renewal.
Hey, Dylan, we have a question regarding what you just covered. Is there any consideration on changing or removing the square feet percentage of for new construction? Many buildings have smaller expansion projects, and the construction phase often impacts site energy use.
I may pass this one to Luke. Would you be comfortable answering, or Judy?
Yeah, so let me summarize the question, make sure I got it right. So adjusting the threshold for new construction on additions. I'm sorry, Adeline, maybe you should repeat that.
Is there any consideration on changing or removing it says SFT, so I'm assuming square feet percentage for new construction? Many buildings have smaller expansion projects, and the construction phase often impacts site energy use. Let me go back to the slide.
Luke, I believe this is referring to the 25% threshold.
There we go. Yep.
Okay, yeah, we can look into that. We kind of have to set a threshold, and we felt 25% was reasonable, but thanks for the comment. If you have any more, if you want to submit that as a formal comment, that's great. We will look at it either way, but the more data that you can provide justifying a reduction would be useful in that decision-making process.
Thanks, Luke. Another question came in. Does compliance light include O&M plans that are created but have not yet implemented?
Compliance light would require implementation of the O&M program by the compliance date or the extension date. If that's a consideration.
Great, thanks, Luke. That's all we've received so far. We can continue.
Right, let's go to tier 1 exemptions. Great. Once again, for this section, it got a little bit longer, and Luke will be going through the actual document language. So in the slides, I'm just going to cover the new exemption additions. However, there were changes and modifications that were made, so I'm just going to cover this a little bit on this slide. A couple changes that were made were allowing for combination exemptions, exemption stacking, which is in this first sentence here. So covered buildings are not eligible for exemption from the standards unless they meet one or a combination of multiple exemptions affecting more than 50% of the building's square footage. So this does allow for instances where someone has, say, 30% manufacturing space and 30% space that does not have a certificate of occupancy. It allows for exemption stacking in some of those instances. Notably, there are There is still, there were also changes made for the partial exemption language. So for physical occupancy, manufacturing or industrial, and certificate of occupancy, that partial exemption was removed. There is still a partial exemption for buildings that have a unconditioned space exemption. So an example of this would be, let's say you have a building that is 70,000 square feet and 30,000 square feet of that is unconditioned. That 40,000 square feet of conditioned space would still be expected to comply with the tier 2 or the compliance light requirements. Going on to one of the changes here, going on to the next slide. Financial hardship had additions that were made for K through 12 schools and hospitals. So K through 12 schools, it allows for financial hardships related to capital construction or improvements, specifically failed bonds or levies, district debt capacity, or corrections to State Board of Health violations. Hospitals, this one, financial hardship, is for a public hospital district that lacks the debt capacity to cover cost of compliance. And next slide, please. The next set of exemptions here. We've got national security. This one is a new one. This is for buildings that are meeting the standard or for which meeting the standard would impair national security interests. And finally, the compliance light. Under the compliance light, this is for buildings that have extenuating conditions. So this would exempt buildings from complying with the performance metric. They would still be expected to do benchmarking and the creation of the energy management plan and operations and maintenance program. However, they wouldn't need to meet a energy use intensity target in the instances of historical integrity or significant losses in assessed value. Historical integrity, this is referring to buildings that can document that the identified EM would impair historical integrity of the building. And this includes, but is not limited to, properties in the National Register of Historic Places, the Washington Heritage Register, or local municipalities. The second one is significant losses in assessed value. We kept this the same as well since workshop 1, but this is buildings that have had significant losses in assessed value since March 2020, preventing building owners from securing capital in the form of loans against equity in the covered building.
Thanks, Dylan. Can we pause
yes.
for some questions and comments?
Absolutely.
So Jaden mentions regarding renovation, less than 25%. It seems like owners should be able to use compliance light to extend the measurement period after construction. So construction energy does not impact the energy used for the performance measurement period.
Yes, this is a very good point. Jaden is pointing out that this building may not be able to get an extension for construction, but they still would be able to get an extension so long as they've completed the benchmarking energy management plan, determined an energy use intensity target, and implemented the operations and maintenance program. They would not need to, they would be able to qualify for that compliance light extension. Very good point. Very good note, Jaden.
Next one comes from Cassie. What are the changes to the first slide of Tier 1 exemption? I'm going to go back to that. Allowing for combination exemptions. What else was there?
Yes. So for these sections, there was the removal of language for partial exemption. So when when Luke brings up the document language, I'll have Luke show where this is removed, but initially the physical occupancy, unconditioned space, and manufacturing exemptions all had a section that says if the aggregate floor area with non-exempt occupancy classification is greater than 20,000 square feet, it shall comply with Tier 2 covered building requirements. This has now been adjusted in the language and removed for all but the unconditioned and semi-heated space. Luke, would you make a note to just point that out when you go through that document language? That'd be very helpful.
Great.
And
And
just-
last one. So go ahead,
Just to
Judy.
note, unconditioned and semi-heated space should be listed in C right here. And demolition is not E, so manufacturing bumps to D and agricultural bumps to E. It's just a typo. Yeah.
Thanks, Judy.
Yep.
Okay.
We'll also correct this before these slides go out and were shared. Glad you have that attention to detail. Give a round of applause for Judy. Thanks, Judy.
Well, sorry, I didn't catch it before. Okay.
No, it's good. We have Nick asked, could libraries be added to financial hardship along with schools and hospitals?
Luke, if you want to take this one.
There was no change legislatively in House Bill 1543 that identified libraries specifically as it did with hospitals and schools. As it is stated right now, they would be eligible for financial hardship based on the criteria currently in the standard. I would be curious to hear more about what, maybe in a formal comment of where libraries would have any special considerations over other occupancies when it comes to financial hardship. I imagine most of libraries that can't afford compliance with the standard would be able to document some financial hardship according to how the rules are currently written.
Great, thanks, Luke. Faith asks, what constitutes as significant loss in assessed value?
That's a great question, Faith. We don't have it specifically defined. It would be something that we would likely need to consult with our legal team to define and probably publish within our guidance documents. It was not specifically laid out within the legislation itself.
So similar to Faith's question, someone asked, how do you define heavy financial need?
So with the financial hardship rules, there's only so much we can specifically define within the rules. Everybody has a different case in consideration, so we try to be broad enough in the rules. We require 2 forms of documentation stating that financial need. In addition, we've already got the outline items within financial hardship. So if there's something beyond those items listed, it's up to the building owner to document and communicate that significant financial need.
Great, thanks, Luke. So far, that's what we have for questions. I'll have Dylan continue. I forgot where we were, Dylan.
Let's start at Tier 2 exemptions.
Okay.
All right, this is very similar to Tier 1 exemption changes. The biggest couple of changes that were made were modifications to that initial language. So covered buildings are not eligible for exemption from the standards unless they meet one or a combination of multiple exemptions affecting more than 50% of the building square footage. That was changed and amended in response to comments that we received. The other one, I apologize, I should have mentioned this for tier 1 exemptions, is we did make changes to the manufacturing or industrial exemption to change language from at least 50% of the building's square footage to just the primary use of the building. And then we also changed we made additions for supporting spaces of manufacturing buildings that directly support the manufacturing or industrial activity. Next slide, please. These last 2 exemption categories were recently added, and for the purposes of this slide, I did not include all of the other forms of financial hardship, which the language was not changed, but I did just highlight the K through 12 schools and hospital language, which is the same as for the tier 1. Also notably in here is national security. This is buildings for which meeting the standard would impair national security interests. Any questions on the tier 2 exemption language?
We did get a request to please highlight that language change for tier 1 exemptions, primary use of building, later in the workshop. So you got that, Luke?
Annalyn, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Says please highlight that language change for tier 1 exemptions, primary use of buildings. I believe
Just show it in
When
like the
when I-
document language.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I'm walking through there, I'll
Yeah.
point it out.
So we're almost at the top of the hour. I don't want to, we're gonna switch to, I believe, going through the document walkthrough. Should we take a break now? We're at 10:51.
I think it's a good pause in the presentation, so be a good
Perfect.
time.
Let's do 10:57 if you get back. I mean, if you're a little late, we're gonna just show how to read through the proposed rules. So and then we'll take it from there. Sounds good? 10:57.
Yeah, great.
Okay. We received a comment from Ron. Some of our comments were received and mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, but the draft rules appear to have not been updated yet to reflect them. Will they still be considered, or and are they under review? Would you prefer that we resubmit the same comments now to ensure they remain on record, or wait until Commerce completes its review and publishes any revised language? Thanks. Ron, you're welcome to resubmit if you'd like. There is several opportunities in which when you resubmit, especially after the CR 102 filing and you don't see your suggested revisions, we have what's called a concise explanatory statement. Those statements will respond to the comments that we received during the formal comment period, and then it'll kind of explain whether we were able to accept it or not, and kind of why not. So I hope that kind of clarifies some of that, but definitely we'll definitely re-look at a lot of the comments to see how we can fit them in, but not all comments and suggestions would be able to be integrated into the rules.
Yeah, and there, if you had a specific question or wanted to about a specific comment or comments, feel free to email us through our buildings email.
Mm-hmm.
We can address that as a technical assistance ticket.
Thanks, Luke.
Yep.
On a different note, RC asks, where can we see what qualifies for a national security exemption?
So national security exemptions are going to I mean, we don't really know how to call them all out. We heard of some examples. I can't recall the example right now. I don't know, Judy, if you had one on top of your mind of one
I
that
have-
was.
I have an example. For example, if there's a building that supports the federal government in some sort of DoD function, like Department of Defense, in which you can't disclose the building use or the energy used for the operations, that's kind of a national security.
Now, and from what I understand, Annalyn, is this true that there's generally a process that at the federal government level that will identify that national security?
I honestly don't know, but I'm sure they can get some sort of letter declaring that, you know, what they're doing and what they can't disclose in some sort of narrative or supporting document.
Right, so every exemption is going to take two discrete documents.
Mhm.
And so to get something that is official that says there's national security concerns.
Okay, Luke, are you ready to move on? You want to take over sharing?
Sure.
Stop sharing. EA brochure. Okay, great.
Sorry about the delay.
That's okay.
All right, I'm gonna.
And just to note, Luke, before you go through that, actually, I'm sorry. We didn't go over kind of how to read this. Can we go over that real quick?
Sure. I'll stop sharing since I know you have that slide.
Okay. And then also of note, Jeff put in a link to the proposed document that Luke is going through. So if you go to the chat, you'll see that link. And here you go. Luke, you want to go over kind of what they'll see and notice when you go over the document?
So, you know, you're probably all familiar with the typical track changes in Microsoft Word. So you'll note that things that are deleted or proposed to be deleted will be struck through the middle with a line. Any additions will have an underline to them. The font color tends to have a meaning as well. If it's black font, that's original language to standard 100. If it's blue font, it represents a section that has been amended through the Washington State's Clean Buildings Performance Standard rulemaking process. Now, it might just be one word in a paragraph and it'll all be blue. So generally, amendments to standard 100 were done minimally. So if we could just change a word or two in order to address a meaning or requirement that was legislatively required or that arose through the rulemaking process, you'll see the whole paragraph in blue.
Thanks, Luke. And I would just like to note, we shared a document for the draft rules, the instructions. We usually have a page 1 for instructions, and we weren't able to incorporate that, but it will be updated later on today. So you'll get a copy of that link via email, or it'll be on our bulletin and our website as well. Okay, now for the actual document walkthrough. Take it over, Luke.
Okay.
I can see it.
All right. So you'll notice I'm not going to go into detail about all the changes or maybe even call out every change. Some of them are editorial and really don't change any meaning. I'll go through the significant ones. Probably less time spent on the stuff that Dylan and Donnie already discussed. But at any time you have a question about a section that we're reviewing on the screen, feel free to put it in the Q&A. And one of the Commerce staff will monitor that and or raise your virtual hand if you have questions. So to to begin here, we just kind of changed some language in the forward here to identify and be clear that we have the authority now legislatively to adopt a later version of ASHRAE Standard 100. We're not doing that at this point, but may choose to do so in the future. As many of you know, ASHRAE Standard 2024, ASHRAE Standard 100 2024 version has been published, and it includes some changes that are fairly significant. One of them is they include a emissions target in addition to energy use intensity targets. We're not quite ready to adopt that, but at some point we may. Additionally, we've added some language here to state that we do have the authority to implement a compliance pathway through a greenhouse gas emissions limits. That is something we intend to explore in more detail and introduce through rulemaking in the future. We did add a little bit to our baseline definition with the introduction of the minimum energy reduction pathway. We felt it would be important to kind of distinguish the difference between baseline and EUI, which is more specific than the general definition of baseline. Again, we changed the defined term certified commissioning professional to provider, since certified commissioning professional is actually a trademark name for a specific certificate, whereas provider is more general. Introduced the term standard to cover all the compliance pathways now that we have more than two. We've introduced a definition for expected useful life and remaining useful life. These are not directly related to House Bill 1543. This is something we want to introduce in order to provide more clarity for how the investment criteria and the life cycle cost analysis of the investment criteria are to be performed. There is a difference between expected useful life, that is what we intend folks to use when determining a energy efficiency measures expected useful life when it comes to life cycle cost analysis. Remaining useful life refers to the not the energy efficiency measure, but to the equipment that measure is to replace. So you'll find that equipment life will vary depending on how it's used and maintained. So you may find a remaining useful life that it actually extends beyond an expected useful life, or you may find that it does not reach an expected useful life. So there is some definitions there to provide clarity. Public hospital district, you may recall the House Bill 1543 called out more specific language for exemptions for public hospital districts. You'll see that we have defined that. It's fairly nuanced, so we decided to just refer to the RCW defining public hospital districts. We have also reached out to public health professionals for maybe a clear and concise definition rather than referencing the RCW, but we don't have anything to share at this point. If we do receive something that meets the intent, we will publish it in the CR 103 or before for the document that goes out for public hearing. There's that definition of remaining useful life. You will see that this must be estimated by the qualified energy auditor during the energy audit. And just some adjustments to the definition of useful life in order to call out the expected useful life and the remaining useful life. Okay, moving into section 4. So this is really where the meat of the compliance pathways lives. So we have our energy management plan operations and maintenance program. There's no changes there. However, not related to House Bill 1543, but we chose to, based on comment from industry professionals, we elected to delete the requirement of the operations and maintenance program having to be implemented 12 months prior to the compliance date. The sooner the better. However, we certainly wouldn't want to deny an application for compliance that was in full compliance with the standard. However, they may not have had that operations and maintenance program implemented for that full 12 months prior to the compliance date. So the way the language will read now is that operations and maintenance program, in addition to the energy management plan, need to be implemented and show documentation of its implementation by the compliance, by the application date. So if that's on the day of compliance, of mandatory compliance, that's fine. We have added some clarity for group buildings, and that when you have you're pursuing compliance at the group building level, and that may be through the connected building level, campus level for those building activities where that applies, or as a campus, perhaps through the district energy system decarbonization requirements of Annex W. We call those group buildings. Group buildings are defined. So if you want more details about that, you can look them in section 3. But we will allow that O&M program to be implemented in a graduated capacity based on the compliance dates of the individual building. So if you have a building that's 220,000 square feet and some that are 150 and some that are 80, the operations and maintenance program will need to be implemented based on the original compliance dates when they're grouped. Added some language in here to accommodate the new compliance pathways. Corrected an error from before. This should have been referring to 7212, and this one 7211. No change in substance, it's just correct reference. We do have an allowance in the standard currently for buildings pursuing compliance through the energy use intensity target. They're more recently built buildings, so these are buildings built after 2015 or with the 2015 Washington State Energy Code or a more recent version of the code. Their target is actually 15% lower than the target for other buildings. So if you have one of these more recently built buildings and your EUI land, your weather normalized EUI lands between the target for new buildings and the target for other buildings, there is an allowance for commissioning of the building in lieu of implementing energy efficiency measures to meet that target that's 15% lower than target for other buildings. We have added language here. As you'll see that if the building was built within 2 years of the compliance date, we would accept the actual commissioning report approved by the local code official in lieu of recommissioning. So the Washington State Energy Code currently requires commissioning for commercial buildings. So if that was actually performed successfully and approved by the local code official within the 2 years of the compliance date, we would accept that in lieu of recommissioning a building that was just commissioned within 2 years. We've also added an allowance for these more recently built buildings that are built within 5 years prior to the compliance date. They can just complete commissioning requirements of the code, even if their target is above or is above the target for all other buildings. So the rationale here is if the building was built within 5 years, there's not likely to be any cost-effective energy efficiency measures. And if there are, those measures probably are not beyond their useful life. And the standard already allows for any measure that's cost effective, that's not beyond its useful life, to delay the implementation of the EEM through phased implementation to a point where the measure is beyond its useful life. So that's just justification for why we believe that just recommissioning the building, if it's less than 5 years old, is the most appropriate means for improving the energy efficiency of the measure in accordance with the standard, rather than having to invest in a more costly energy audit that may not come up with measures that are required to be implemented by the current rules. Okay, so just kind of listing the exceptions for buildings without energy targets. They can either comply through what we call the investment criteria of the standard, or through the minimum energy use reduction pathway or the elective electrification pathway. Some clarifying language here. This doesn't change any meaning. Okay. For buildings pursuing the investment criteria, you are required to demonstrate the reduction of energy consumption by, or you're supposed to measure and verify that you've reduced the energy consumption to at least 75% of what was predicted in the life cycle cost analysis and the energy audit process of the investment criteria. Previously, if you did not meet that 75% reduction, you would have to reevaluate the energy audit and implement any other cost-effective energy efficiency measures. Now, the first pass was implementing any cost-effective energy efficiency measure. So the second pass would likely not identify any new cost-effective energy efficiency measures. So that process could go on annually through that whole compliance cycle. So we felt that an alternative would be appropriate in those situations. So we had originally introduced the International Performance and Measurement Verification Protocols for during the last rulemaking session, and we've since identified just the recommissioning processes of that are outlined in the standard currently as being more appropriate. So again, if you're pursuing the investment criteria and you don't meet that 75% predicted energy savings, you can elect to recommission the whole building according to the standard in order to gain compliance.
Caleb, do you want to take some questions? Let's see. Someone wrote in, I understand the tier 2 GHG ruling isn't coming in the near future, but how will it align with ecology? Will there be a threshold where commerce rules take precedence, then ecology takes over a certain amount of CO2 emissions coming from manufacturing perspective?
Yeah, commerce will certainly align with other state laws as we can. And we will coordinate with ecology. We are working with City of Seattle to try to coordinate our performance standards. There may be opportunities to do so. There may be opportunities where we can't. And then in those cases, we at least coordinate with the agencies and try to develop a plan to prevent any contradiction in standards. Now, I just want to note that the Clean Buildings Performance Standard does not apply to manufacturing or industrial processes. So hopefully there won't be as much conflict there. But if you're willing to send in a comment or a QA regarding this question and provide some detail of where those conflicts are, or we see those conflicts to be, we'll definitely make note of that. Thank you.
Thanks. We had a question from Faith. So these recent constructed buildings still have to meet the benchmarking, O&M, and EMP, right? Those requirements?
Correct. Yeah. So if you do take advantage of any of these recommissioning allowances in those particular situations, just be aware that that's just in lieu of meeting the performance target, whether it's the 75% reduction or the energy use intensity target. And the benchmarking, EMP, and O&M are always required for any compliance application unless it's compliance through an exemption.
Great, thanks, Luke. And last one that I see here from Karen. Currently, hours of occupancy for theaters, sports arenas, and other public spaces count only hours the building is, quote, open to the public. It does not include practices, tech rehearsals, dress rehearsals, etc. when the building is operating in occupied mode. Can the language of what is meant by open to the public be redefined to include some non-public uses? The targets EUI are extremely low when only taking into account showtimes and game times.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. We'll look into that. We'll consult the CBEX data set and the commercial building stock assessment data set that we use in order to develop these targets and see if there's room for us to adjust that language to be more appropriate for those different occupancies.
And I think it would be helpful if you could send that in the comment form, Karen. I think it would be helpful so that we don't forget it, overlook it, just because we may not note all the ones that come in. So thank you. And that's all we got, Luke. Thank you.
So moving on, Donnie covered the minimum energy use reduction in the elective electrification requirements in detail. I'm not going to go into any more detail, I don't think, at this point, unless someone has a specific question. Now, keep in mind, I know there were some comments about the lowering the minimum capacity of the space heating system that's electrified from 90 down to 80 or 50. Now keep in mind, this is just for the electrification of the heating system. If you have process loads that require some gas heat or gas consumption, or you have domestic hot water that needs gas consumption, then those won't be part of this calculation. We feel that strongly that 10% should be enough if it typical heating systems designed to provide the primary heating system for a building, that would be sufficient to cover any emergency or extreme weather events. So we're moving down into section 5 here, which primarily covers the energy management plans, as well as energy use intensity target or EUI development. Not any big changes here. Some clarity within the standard to assure folks that if they have renewables on site, they can deduct that from their energy use intensity calculation. Doesn't have to physically be on a building, but it has to be on the site. We did change the language a little bit here to be more clear that that Commerce may increase the list of end-use deductions allowable where the energy use does not support building functions. So we're talking about EV charging systems here, billboards, communication towers on top of the building, that kind of stuff. We decided to insert some specific language from RCW relating to utility sharing energy data with building owners. So this is required through the RCW. It's not part of 1543, but it has been amended and it does affect the Clean Building Performance Standard. So we thought we would draw attention to that, because that is a common question, is, how do I get utility data from my tenants if they're not willing to give it to me? Okay, now we did mention, or Annalyn mentioned, changes to 6.5. This was not related to 1543 either, but it was a comment that was received that we felt that was worth addressing in the standard. So currently, with tenant improvements, the energy manager shall put in place a formal process to ensure that any tenant improvements involving a change in space use or relocation, partitions, do not change the annual net energy use. So this seemed to be justifiably a large barrier within the operations and maintenance program development of the standard. So we felt that the intent is meaningful. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't fully remove this requirement, but make it more of a consideration. So it's not a full-on requirement.
Luke, do you want to take a couple comments and questions?
Sure.
Ian mentions if you're going to review CBECs regarding shift normalization, occupancy factors, please do it for K-12 schools as well. And then the question, did you say that one site solar could be conducted? This is a different person, by the way. Did you say that on-site solar could be deducted from building EUI?
The standard is currently written. It's clear that you can deduct energy use of renewables from the building's EUI, and that the way the language is stated, it's unclear whether that renewable energy source needs to be on the building. We have reached out and provided guidance in the past after consulting with our legal team to whether we can extend that to on-site solar, and the answer was yes, that meets the intent of the standard. So if you have solar on the site but not necessarily attached to the building, you can deduct that from the EUI of the building as written within this structure of the standard already. So this just brings clarity to that.
Thanks. Just last one. Will we be updating the EMP and O&M checklist at the same time these new rules are codified?
All our guidance documents will be updated as these rules are codified. So shortly after the first of the year, when we are estimating this to be published, we will make sure those are published with the amendments. We'll likely get started with them shortly after we're actually done with the rulemaking effort here. So in the fall.
And then just to go back to that 6.5 to confirm 6.5 no longer requires a tenant improvement section in order to be compliant.
It just speaks of the energy matter shall consider implementing it and not the more mandatory put in place language.
Thanks, that's it.
Okay, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit here so we can get through the content, but so maybe not spend as much time on stuff that we've already spoke of in the past. So we changed some titles here. We wanted to put in some language here to notify you or the building owners that targets will likely be adjusted periodically over time. So section 8, we just identified where the new compliance pathways fit into the energy audit requirements of the standard. So you'll note here some direction for that. So again, 4.3.4 is the minimum energy reduction. It's going to require a energy audit, either level 1, level 2, in order to identify what energy efficiency measures are going to need to be implemented in order to meet that minimum reduction. More language kind of identifying those new compliance pathways and their requirements. There was a existing calculation here for the energy use reduction required for the investment criteria. If we place one in here, it kind of mimics that, but for the 15% reduction, feel free to review that, make sure it looks accurate to you, especially you engineers and energy auditors out there that do this on the regular. There's more reference to the new compliance pathways. Again, the minimum energy reduction compliance pathway requires an energy audit, whereas the elective electrification does not. Just the implementation of EEMs, reference to them. Section 9 is about implementation. Information. Moving on, and you're going to see a big jump here. Oh, before. We talked about informative Annex B last workshop. I'm not going to go into details again. Again, this is an informative annex. The informative annex aren't required. The intent here is to kind of summarize the different compliance paths and the requirements of each of those compliance paths. Feel free to take a look at that and see if that's useful, especially for you new users of the standard. But even those of you with experience looking at the standard, see if this is useful, and if you have any suggestions on where we need to clarify language even more for it to be clear what the different compliance pathways require. Again, that's informative Annex B, which is a new introduced annex to the standard. Informative Annex D, again, that's just an informational annex. It talks about developing an operations and maintenance program. Make any amendments to that informative annex. We typically don't amend the informative annex. Informative Annex E is similar. No changes made to it. It's informative. I'm gonna just kind of skip through here. So we did add some clarifying language in the Annex L, just to reiterate that building owners are not excused from compliance due to existence of an authorized representative. So you can't just pass the liability onto an authorized representative for compliance. It's ultimately the building owner's responsibility. So just clarifying language. Just some more clarifying language as well. A lot of this is just kind of generally understood, but we wanted to create more clarification where we do get some questions. Annex W, there's minimal influence on Annex W from the rule changes. Again, this is the district energy system decarbonization requirements. You'll see that we've added some titles to sections just for clarity, rather than just referring to the forms. We're naming the form. The decarbonization decarbonization requirements for district energy systems some affect most buildings. That would be just the state-owned buildings that are connected to a district energy system where there's 5 or more buildings and 100,000 square feet. And some non-state-owned buildings or smaller state-owned campuses may have elected to comply with the decarbonization requirements. We did add a provision in here where we've changed the language here for implement all EEMs. This is no change from the existing requirement that if you just implement all the energy efficiency measures identified through the investment criteria as level 2 energy audit, you don't need to do the life cycle cost analysis. We've also introduced a allowance that you can actually implement a custom bundle of EEMs in lieu of the optimized bundle. The optimized bundle is the bundle of EEMs that the lifecycle cost analysis identifies as being cost effective. But if you have other plans, let's say you have a non-cost effective energy efficiency measure, but you're going to replace it anyways, and you end up with the same savings that you would have had if you implemented the optimized bundle, that's okay. This provision gives you the authority to do that. Just some adjustments to the useful life language to be more clear, as we noted in section 3. Annex Y. So we're going into some clarifying language here. Talk about the extensions that Dylan covered in detail in the slideshow. Appliance light, again, that's an allowance for an extension. If you for tier 2, if you benchmark the building, you need a little more time to implement the EMP and the O&M. You can report to us your benchmarking and get an extension of 2 years in order to get that EMP and O&M done. I will note that upon expiration of the 2-year extension, you need to comply, which would be implementation of the EMP in the O&M or apply for an exemption. You don't get an allowance for a second 2-year extension like tier 1 buildings do. We felt that we didn't need conditional compliance for tier 2 because it's more restrictive than the extensions. So with the addition of extensions, we've deleted the conditional compliance requirements, which really only gives you an extra 180 days to comply rather than 2 years. The exemptions, how they apply to, multiple exemptions is similar to tier 1. We do discuss the change from more than 50% of the gross floor area of the building is used for manufacturing to the primary use of the building in order to accommodate with that stacking of partial exemptions. So hopefully that addresses some of the concerns. And that's how we've applied it to tier 1 buildings as well. So you'll see that in Z. Same kind of language for tier 1 buildings is for tier 2 when it comes to the additional language for K-12 schools, hospitals. Again, this is our tier 2 requirements, reporting requirements. From Y42 down a bit, looks like a lot of changes. It's not substantive. It's just added language for clarity, adding titles to these forms, for example. Again, we eliminated conditional compliance because of the more advantageous extensions. You'll see that struck out. Just some adjusted language to be more clear. So, in the interest of time, I'm kind of cruising through this fairly quickly, but do take a look at each of the marked up areas in order to get a clearer understanding of the revised changes and to be able to comment appropriately on ways you think would be helpful to improve the effectiveness of the standard. We're getting close here. Okay, so moving into Annex Z. Again, this is very similar to Annex Y, and this is the material that Dylan covered in the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. Did make some changes here for instead of talking about the largest covered buildings as far as these reporting requirements, it's based on the earliest compliance date, not the largest building. It's just more clear because you could have a building that's part of a connected building compliance where you have tier 1 and tier 2 buildings, and your largest building actually has a later compliance date. So we wanted to make sure we clarify that it should be the earliest compliance date. Again, some provisions. There was a question about change of ownership. I do, our change of ownership allowance here is, I believe, in alignment with the Seattle's building emissions performance standard. And it allows for, when we do have a transaction, the sale of a building, that building owners get some extra time to comply. They can also use that 12 months to implement the EMP and the O&M program and apply for an extension. So if they want another couple years, or if it's tier 1, maybe 2 years, or 4 years of total extension. And I did want to just draw out again that for tier 1 buildings, you can apply for a second extension if need be. You would just need to comply with Compliance Light in order to get that renewal, which is, again, the benchmarking and implementation of the energy management plan and the operations and maintenance program. And just let me know if there are any questions you want me to handle while we're in the relevant sections.
Oh, there's a few that, especially what you're on right now. You ready? So Samantha asks, so if I have a tier 1 building and the primary function is for manufacturing with factory and H classification spaces, does that mean the building is in total exemption or is totally exempt from the clean buildings standard? What must be done to apply for an exemption?
So let me get to that section right now. So we're assuming it's going to be primary means 50% or more unless you have multiple. And Dylan, if you want to, or Judy, you want to chime in here for clarification, that be great. So if it's applying for exemption based on the primary use, that would be, you know, more than 50% of the building is utilized as manufacturing. If it's stacking other exemptions on, it could be 30% manufacturing, for example, and then, but the addition of other eligible exemptions, if it creates a dominance of gross floor area that's exempt space of 50% or more, then it would comply with the standards. So it's not loosening the requirement for manufacturing. It's just allowing for the addition of other exemptions in order to reach that 50% threshold.
Well, and just to
Great.
add to what Luke said, the primary use is the paragraph after it is talking about the support areas being added to that primary use square footage, and that if it's a separate tenant, it is not. So even though you could say the building is primarily used, if you have separate tenant space, that other tenant space is not manufacturing, wouldn't be covered by the exemption, right, Luke?
So currently, if you look at the definitions in table 7-4 for any of the building activity types that have targets, and there's even a couple in there that don't have targets, but there's a definition of them. They'll note stuff like, you know, for a hospital, for example, you would include the GFA under the hospital building activity, including, you know, break rooms, hallways, lobbies, restaurants, even hospitals. So there's these associated uses that they may be different building activities than we would typically think as a hospital, but they support the primary function of the hospital. Then that is all included in the GFA of that hospital. We do not have a definition for all of the building activity target types that don't have targets, such as exempt spaces like agriculture or manufacturing, but you would apply that same kind of rationale to the manufacturing. Does that restaurant or cafeteria within the building that houses the manufacturing building activity support that process? So that's the intent here, is to bring more clarity there. If you have a separate tenant space in a large building that has nothing to do with that manufacturing process or activity, you would not include that GFA within the manufacturing building activity type.
Thanks. And just to add to that question, they asked, would they have to wait until the rules are codified, and would an EMP and O&M still be required?
You have a full exemption through section Z4.1, then no, you do not need to implement an EMP and an O&M program. However, there is an option for compliance light within those exemptions. So if you don't quite meet the provisions of any of these financial hardships, but you do have extenuating circumstances, there may be an opportunity for compliance light, which would require the benchmarking EMP and O&M program.
Great, thanks. Someone asks, what evidence requirements for O&M implementation other than providing evidence of the preventive maintenance task completion? Are there any other evidence requirements to show implementation?
Wouldn't mind if Donnie or James answered this one, since they're the ones primarily responding to this question. You guys available to do that?
Yeah, so I'm actually was looking at this and trying to think through if there's anything else that really clearly needs to be documented as evidence of implementation. The O&M and EMP both require things like staff training plans, equipment inventory, like all that information has to be documented as well. But I think for actually showing clear proof of implementation, having that example PM task identified with the recurrence interval. So how often does it happen? What is the task? Who's performing it? Any condition indicators? I believe that's all that I can think of off the top of my head. Donnie, I'm not sure if you have anything else.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of scenarios, a lot of situations, buildings already have some level of preventive maintenance program in place. And so kind of documenting in the submission how those current practices align with the requirements in the standard. And then, as James alluded to, just providing evidence like a completed work order, preventive maintenance work order is helpful just to confirm that those tasks are being, or that programs being implemented, and it documents the tasks and how they align with the preventive maintenance tasks that are outlined within the O&M program. So just kind of that evidence that you're actually utilizing the tool. It's not just like a report that you submit every 5 years. Just looking for kind of that evidence to just show that it's being used.
So are service contracts and service logs adequate ways of documenting
Yeah,
the-
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of buildings too. Yeah. All the maintenance tasks, preventive maintenance work is handled via service contracts. So yeah, showing kind of providing an example of the actual contract that's in place, and then again, just completed work orders from the contractor as they complete those preventive maintenance tasks. Just examples of them. It doesn't have to be an exhaustive bundle of tasks completed over the last 5 years or anything like that. Just kind of demonstrating that we're actually doing something to meet the requirements of the O&M program.
Thanks. You answered that last question without being asked. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so you all saw me kind of filing through Z4. That's the compliance the documentation requirements for compliance, and there were no substantive changes there. We're just adding titles and stuff. There will be an addition of more compliance documentation requirements for the new compliance pathways when we publish the final version for public hearing. So please take a look at that. For a little more detail, unfortunately, we didn't have the capacity to get all the reporting requirement additions into this this presentation today. We've talked about this before, some added language to kind of draw out the RCWs that are were added in order to clarify where penalties that they cannot be passed along to tenants unless there is some actual the tenants were not responsive and prevented compliance. Late fees, we had some language of late fees to clarify so people have a better understanding. Legislatively, the standard allows us to fine $1 per square foot for every for 5 years total. So on an annual basis. So we elected to reduce the penalty to a fraction of that, just 20% of what we're legislatively required. So in total of 18 months. So I guess that was 25%. And then, but if you look at the late fees here, we do have the authority to penalize you that full 60 months worth of penalty if you're not paying the penalty within 180 days of when it was sent out, or you fail to litigate it. So this is no substantive change. It just provides more clarity, so it's evident. Moving on here, we've just got kind of our forms. There's adjustments to the forms that we made to accommodate the clients. There's no real substance change, nothing to really address. But if you want to take a look at it and make comment on anything to make it clear, feel free to do so. We're just adding specific information related to those compliance pathways and then clarifying some other stuff. So that's all I'm going to do for now, since we're a minute from the end. Hopefully, I can stay a little bit longer if folks want to get whatever questions have not been answered in.
There was a question about penalties. What are the funds from penalties used for?
So for tier 1, the legislation says the penalties go to low-income weatherization projects in the state. And for tier 2, it both goes to low-income weatherization projects as well as to support the standard implementation of the standard. So that could look like, creating grants and incentives for other building owners to comply.
Thanks, Luke. Can I just take over the
Sure.
the slideshow just to wrap up on some things? Do you see my notes or do you see the slides?
Notes.
Excuse me, I couldn't hear you.
I see notes.
Okay, how do I replace swap? Okay, there we go. Just to remind you, all of the information can be found in our Clean Buildings website, House Bill
You'll see the
1540.
notes.
Oh, how do I do this? There you go. Still notes?
Still notes.
Gosh dang it. How do I? Okay, I'm just gonna do this. How about now?
Good.
Great. Where to find information? Go to our homepage, House Bill 1543. You can expand it and it'll give you all the recordings, all of the proposed rules, the comment forms, everything we kind of presented there. And then, to stay up to date, this is our last workshop. The Clean Buildings Bulletin, subscribe to it on our website, scroll down to the right, there's a subscription button. You can subscribe to our bulletin and all of Commerce, all of the different programs that we offer and that we mentioned earlier that we provide. And then, and you'll hear about when we file our CR 102, the comment period, the future public hearing, all of that, and everything will be formalized. We will try to communicate this as soon as possible. Hopefully we can stay on track and on schedule. CR 102 hopefully will be filed October 1st, and then public hearing after that, and with the final rules in December. And I just want to thank you all again for your time, attention, and we appreciate the comments that you've submitted so far. Have a great day.
Lynn, can you repeat the remaining opportunities for public comment?
You can submit comments right after this, up until the point of the public hearing.
Thank you.
We stop the recording and we're complete.